One. Welcome everybody to the #Invest This podcast. I am your host, Scott Bauer. Today, we're on the 23rd episode. Pretty exciting. I got Reed Goossens with me today. Reed moved to the U.S. in 2012 to pursue a career in structural engineering. However, he discovered a passion for real estate investing. Go figure, right? With limited funds and no credit, Reed went from purchasing a small duplex to growing his own real estate investing firm, RSN Property Group. He now syndicates large multi-million-dollar deals across the U.S. He certainly lives up to the never say die Aussie attitude when it comes to being a successful entrepreneur. Reed is also the host of the up-and-coming podcast, Investing in the U.S., an Aussie's Guide to U.S. Real Estate, wherein he invites other distinguished real estate investors and entrepreneurs to speak with him about their success and help guide other international investors who want to successfully invest in the U.S. So, Reed, thank you for being here. How are you doing today?
G'day, mate. How's it going? Thanks for having me on your show.
Absolutely. I'm doing really, really well. Why don't you give the listeners a little bit more about your background, about your trip here from Australia, and what you're focused on now?
Yeah, I know. Everyone always asks me about my weird accent down by West Texas, right? Down the deep south. Yeah, so I'm originally from Australia. The reason I moved to the United States was actually for two reasons. One was for love. Two reasons was for love. And the first love was for my girlfriend, who's American, who's now my wife. I have a ring on it. And the second love was for New York City. And I backpacked through the United States back in 2009, fell in love with the United States. I said to myself, I've got to live here at some point in my future. Went back to Australia in 2009, picked up the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, and just, that was the really tipping point for me. And my background's in structural engineering and civil engineering, and so I've worked for a better part of a decade across the globe as a professional, working on multifamily ground-up construction. I worked on infrastructure. I worked on the 2012 Olympic Games back in 2008 when I was living in London. So I've traveled a lot around the world, which has exposed me to a lot of awesome things. But one of the biggest awesome things was to move to the United States and live the American dream and come and chase my girlfriend at the time, now my wife. And so that's really what brought me here in 2012. And I rocked up with no job, a limited time to find a job. Otherwise I'd be kicked out and I needed a visa. And within 2 weeks of landing on these shores, I was at my first RIA event in downtown New York City, and that the rest is history. But we'll get into it, I'm sure, in a little bit.
Yeah, I mean that's got to be a difficult move, right? I mean, I moved from Iowa to Arizona. That was a hard enough move, and that was within the U.S. So going from country, especially down in Australia, to the U.S., I know there's some similarities, but gosh, what made you do that?
So we're all a bunch of crazies down in Australia. We're all as mad as cut snakes. But the truth is, it's all in our DNA. Australians, we're an island. It's called Down Under because it's just us and New Zealand down there. We're very similar. So Australians like to travel, and we want to get out. We usually do university and then go travel for a year. And I did exactly that. I traveled for 2 years around the world, and whilst working full time. But we have I think the way I was brought up was like, I'm scared of not my unfulfilled potential. Like, I'm scared of not giving it a crack. And I remember the first day that I was going to leave. I just finished university. My parents could come to drop me off at the airport. And I was bloody shaking, quivering. My leg was quivering to leave, to go off on this journey to, not necessarily to the United States, but just go off and leave Australia. And it was very daunting. But the fact that I backed myself to do it was incredible, because now I'm sitting here and I have a really successful real estate investing company. And we'll get into the nuts and bolts of that, but the takeaway is that I backed myself to do it, and that's really, really important for any entrepreneur and person, whether it's you're an entrepreneur or just wanting to move across the world and experience a new culture.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, and probably just taking that fear and showing that fear of who's boss, right? I mean,
exactly.
You took it and you ran with it, and now look at you. So good for you, man. Glad that you're here. Why don't you take us now into how you got into the real estate investing side, or what that looks like for you now?
Yeah, so I just touched on it so after my gallivanting and backpacking around the world and meeting my girlfriend and now my wife, and I moved back to Australia in 2009, picked up the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, and had that sense of like, I can't be sitting in a cubicle for the rest of my life, and that book ignited that sort of spark in me. I was learning as much stuff as I could in Australia before moving to the United States in 2011, 2012. But I had that passion to move here and still, give it a go in New York City and live in the Big Apple. So when I landed in New York City, I had a very limited amount of funds. Had to buy, all cash. I had no credit to my name. But I wanted to get into the market. And for everyone who's out there who's sitting on the fence, the United States has such a low barrier to entry compared to Australia that I was blown away that I could go and buy a triplex for $50,000. I was like, you can't find that in Australia. So it was just, to me, I was like, holy crap, I can do this rich dad, poor dad thing here in America, right? And so
it's real.
Yeah, it's real, right? It exists. And so through just the learning and the first 6 months of just getting to know the investing lingo here, because it's a little bit different to Australia, getting to know the lay of the land, how banks work, what's a title company, what's an LLC, blah, 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 how to get someone to blend to me with no credit. I eventually bought my first triplex all cash, and I learned a lot from that triplex, but it also got me into the game, and that was the biggest part, that it got me into the game. I got my first deal. I was able to buy it all cash. 6 months later, I was able to refi a little bit of money out of it and buy a second deal, and from there, I was able to snowball the effect into what I do today. So that's a little bit of the background.
So that's the background. I mean, you got into your first deal, you got your first triplex, you learned how that works. Now where are you at? Walk us down the line.
So I'm 3 deals deep. I'm still working full time, and it's Christmas 2013, and I'm sitting in a bar in New York with my Canadian buddy, and he goes to me, and I go to him like, oh, guess what? I've got 3 places in upstate New York, and probably of some total of $170,000 of a portfolio, like some mere amount. And he's like, Reed, that's so bloody fantastic. But he's like, I just closed on a 70 unit. I was like, what do you mean you closed on a 70 unit? How did you get the money to do that? He's like, I use friends and family and use OPM. And I was like, what the hell are you talking about? I was like, take the idea of what you're doing with the triplex. You're going in, you're buying it, you're increasing rents, and you're forcing the appreciation. And he's like, now apply that to a large multifamily. And I was like, he's like, it's a business. You're going to be able to force the business, appreciation of the business. And it all started, the penny started to drop for me. And I was like, oh, I get it. I can raise money from other people, but how do I do it? So I went and got a coach. Through that coach, I learned a little bit. And, I'm fast forwarding a lot, but I started RSN Property Group, started brand investing in the US to educate other international investors about the benefits here. And then from that, I was able just to build that personal brand. I started raising a bit of capital, helped raise capital on other people's deals. And the last couple of years, I've gone out and done my own deals. And so it's been a long journey, and it's also been quite a short journey if you think that I only moved here, 6 years ago, 6.5 years ago. So the biggest thing I say to people is if Reed can move to the United States from halfway across the world, and now I've been involved. I currently control over $40 million worth of multifamily real estate. I've been involved in over $100 million worth of syndication since moving here. And I came with, 30 grand in my pocket. So if I can do it, so can anyone listening to this show.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But why don't you walk us down what that kind of looks like when you're going to raise money for those out there that don't know what that means?
Yep.
One, what is it? And how do you do it? I mean, it's not.
Yeah. Well, mate, look, I'm an engineer, right? I'm a numbers guy. I went to study. I got an honors in structural engineering. So I am a little bit different than the average engineer, I'd like to say. But the fact is I had to learn how to brand myself, right? That's a whole thing of what people, whether you're in real estate syndication or you're in a startup or you have a great business idea, at the end of the day, the business idea needs to work first and foremost, when real estate syndication does. But people are going to invest in you, the person, not a brand, not a company. I started RSN Property Group. Looking back on it, RSN Property Group's now on the back burner. It's really the Reed Goossens show, if that makes sense, because people wanted to learn about me and what I do. And so it's about building that brand. It's about building your key person of influence status in your sphere. So what does that mean? It means that you need to become the go-to person in your friends and families and colleagues' sphere in order to learn about real estate investing. And if you are positioning yourself as that key person of influence in your sphere, then people are going to look at you as the quote-unquote guru, and they're going to come to you and say, hey, I've got some extra capital, I want to invest it. Can you help me out? And look, it's not rocket science, but at the end of the day, it's branding, and it takes time. And if you're consistent with your brand and you're consistent with your message, you will eventually attract a lot of capital. And it's not going to happen overnight.
Yep.
When I started, I remember raising my first bit of money on this 250 unit deal that I was helping someone else close on. I thought, I'm going to easily raise $500,000. I was humbly awake and I couldn't even raise $100,000. I realized when looking back on my successes and failures, I had to approach 100 people to pitch them what's called a social pitch, which is like, I'm in real estate investing, blah, blah, blah. Do you want to schedule a sit down? I got 10 people to sit down with me. Out of those 10 people to sit down with me, I got 5 people who wanted to maybe take it a little bit further. And of those 5 people, I only got 1 person to invest. That was it. Like, it was just very humbling. Now, that was my first one many, many years ago, but it gets easier and easier, and it comes back to brand. Like you have a fantastic podcast. I have a fantastic podcast as well. I lead with the education piece, and that there is really important. And you don't have to go out and start a podcast. You can do something as simple as starting a monthly newsletter for your people that just your friends and family. Develop your database, your CRM. It can be very basic, and you can just, each month send them an update on what you're doing, or here's a great article I read in Forbes, or here's a great article I read about real estate investing in this particular market, and slowly start to change the perception of what people think of you. Because like me, I was a structural engineer, and people are like, oh, Reed's a structural engineer. He doesn't know what he's talking about when it comes to real estate. And it takes time to develop that key person of influence status. So, back to your original question, it's a long-winded way, but there's a lot to raise capital takes time, but it's about putting yourself out there. It's 2018. Come on, guys, get off the fence. You're going to have to take the life by the balls and you've got to lead with that education piece in order to get people to follow you, in order to get people to understand your message. And for me, my niche, you got to understand what your niche is. And coming to America, I've got this weird accent. There's not many people talking to international investors. I thought, heck, I can be the number 1 podcast for international investors because I'm the only bloody podcast, right? So there's just different ways of thinking about it. Now I pivoted the podcast to be inclusive of everyone. But when I first started, I niched till it hurts. And then from there, I was able to expand. So I hope that answers the question.
Well, and you did, and I appreciate that answer, because I think you touched on something that's pretty important, and that's the education part. You're thinking about not yourself, but how to help other people, right? You touch enough other people, you'll get what you want. You help enough other people get what they want, you'll get what you want. And that's such a key, important piece. And so I appreciate you sharing that. Now, what's next? So you've been syndicating deals. You have 40 million in assets under management. You've been part of over 100 million. What's next? I mean, why? What makes you tick? Why do you want to?
Look, what makes me tick? I just had you on my show, Scott. You're fantastic, and you talked a lot about the why. And look, as you grow older and as you get more wise as a real estate entrepreneur, or just any entrepreneur in terms of business and creating financial freedom for yourself, you start to really understand what makes you tick. And sometimes you don't know what makes you tick when you start. And I didn't really. I just wanted to get free. I was sick of the day job. That was what it originally was back in the day when I picked up Rich Dad Poor Dad. Since then, it's about creating a longevity for my family, my future family, but also time freedom is really important. I just recently lost my mum, unfortunately, but it really makes you. You said on my show, it's like, you only got one life, but it's a short life. Make sure you're living it to the fullest. And one of the biggest things that makes me scared, it's not failure, it's the fact that I'm unfulfilled potential. And that's really, and that's really like something to me that that sort of gets me up in the morning, is to make sure that I'm the most successful person I can be. I can provide the most, best life for me and my wife, and I can enjoy my time with my family who are back in Australia. So there's a lot of back and forth. I'm actually flying to Australia this week on a Wednesday. So I'm off to the Great Barrier Reef. There's things that I can do whilst it allows you, whilst you do real estate investing. But from a business point of view, I'm all about developing a brand. I love the brand, the podcast I do. I love developing. I'm about to launch a book. I love that piece of it, but I'm also, think of me like the COO. I'm very also orientated into the nuts and bolts. I've come from the construction world. I understand how to run construction management. I understand how to run numbers. I understand how to run crews. So I'm very hands-on in terms of, I get into the weeds with my interior designers. I get into the weeds with my architects. I get into the weeds with my GC. That's because I'm inherently into the weeds and they can't pull the wool over my eyes when they want to try and pull the wool over my eyes. So when we do these syndications and we're going to spend, $2 or $3 million on this, this $20 million property to rehab it, people are like, oh, that's a lot of money. It's like, well, I've come from the world where I've managed over $500 million worth of real estate development for other people when I was working full-time as a civil engineer. So I've come from that world of project management, and it's not rocket science, it's just managing people. So what the future holds for what I do, I'm now the co-founder of Wildhorn Capital. We are buying obviously a lot of US multifamily, but I'm also developing the Reed Goossens brand. I'm developing we're looking to acquire another 1,000 units in the next 12 months. But I'm also looking to develop recession-proof businesses. And what really makes me tick these days is, think of your investment table. Think of your investment company like a table, and one leg is acquisitions. And as you know, Scott, we're in a very hot world right now of multifamily real estate. But it's my duty as a good person who runs people's investments to create other investment other income streams that I can reduce, that I can be recession proof if we're not always acquiring assets. So what does that mean? So we're going to go spend $2 million on this recent fix of property we just bought, 253 units. I'm going to pay someone at Home Depot I was paying someone at Home Depot to get the materials. Well, why can't I now go to China or Mexico or here in the United States and start sourcing product directly and save my investors and create a sourcing company out of that? Another aspect of the business is underwriting. A lot of people struggle with institutional level underwriting. I pride myself on that, and I'm actually creating a business around that to help other people in order to think of a personal analyst for a fraction of the cost. Again, another leg of the business that's going to be recession proof if we're not always acquiring assets. Now, the main focus is acquiring assets, but we've got to create other businesses in order to support that table so you don't fall over it if we do come to a correction in the next couple of years. I hope long-winded answer, but I hope that's where I got you where I wanted you to get me to.
No, yeah. And I think you made a very valid point. So there are all the different pieces that go into a transaction, right? It's not just the acquisition, but it's also the management, or it's the title company, or it's there's several different pieces. So as a serial entrepreneur or an entrepreneur in general, right, you want to try to grab a little piece of all of that. And if you can kind of control the process and make sure that it's done correctly. And if it's done correctly, then you are recession proof to an extent, right? I mean, when you buy it right and you have it managed correctly and you're getting materials at a cost that's affordable for what you're looking for, then you're doing it the correct way. So hats off to you for that.
I think also just one thing on that, you nailed it, is that you control the process. You're controlling every aspect of the business, and that's inherently what I am as an engineer. I like to control it and understand, well, hang on, and sometimes I don't, like there's businesses that I really don't want to start, but I know that I could start, like a property management business. Do I really want to go start a property management business? Oh, I don't know. Maybe I'll just leave it to the third party and JV with someone later on down the line. But there's just processes that you look at that you can start when you get into real estate investing. You can understand, okay, well, there's that part of the business that I could control. Maybe I want to create a small side business out of that to help support the acquisitions piece, or the rebranding piece, or the repositioning piece. So it's just ways of taking off the blinkers and understanding what opportunities are out there.
Yeah, and matter of fact, there's one guy here that is in a mastermind group that I'm part of, and he's a good friend of mine, and he just does exactly that. He grabs a little piece of every piece, and he controls it. And he's kind of the hidden gem. You wouldn't know that he has his hand in every single piece, but he's very, very smart for thinking that way. That's the best way to go. And I can envision myself being there later on. So, thank you for sharing that. From a time standpoint, let's go into the last questions. Are you ready for the lightning round?
Let's do it.
Okay. What is your hashtag invest this tip that can keep our listeners moving forward?
I think it goes back to what I said a little bit earlier. Like, we all have to educate yourself. And if you're listening to this show and you're starting out, you've got to go and educate yourself. You've got to surround yourself with the people that you want to be. And the biggest tip I have is if you surround, you're the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with. I can't remember who said that, but someone famous said it. But it's true. You are the average of the 5 people you hang around with. So be educated first and foremost, but also change the circle in which you hang around with. If you want to be successful and you want to be a real estate entrepreneur or a real estate syndicator or a real estate flipper, whatever it might be, surround yourself with successful people who've done it, and you will ultimately be the average of those 5 people.
That's a great tip. It's so true. And everybody listening, you should certainly listen to that. Do you have a favorite book that you've read? What's the impact been?
Of course. So I've got a lot of favorite. Obviously, Rich Dad Poor Dad. That was a tipping point. A couple other books for your listeners, right? Obviously, not obviously, but The 4-Hour Work Week was really influential from a systems point of view. Another book that I'm a huge fan of, and I just talked about it earlier, Key Person of Influence. Dan Priestley, Key Person of Influence. He's actually an Australian author. Check it out. It's all about developing brands. It's all about developing ecosystems. It's all about scaling a business and attracting capital. And it's not about real estate. It's just about anything. So there's some handful of books that I definitely recommend. And the other one is that I'm reading at the moment. It's called Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. It's a really, really fantastic book. It talks about putting your ego aside and how ego can actually hurt you in business growth. So some really good books there.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, those are huge. I have not I've heard of Ego is the Enemy. Recently, somebody else I was talking to was talking about that book. So glad that you brought that up because I don't have it and I'm gonna buy it.
Cool.
Of course, we have mentors. We have people that influence you. So what is the best advice you've ever been given, if you could nail that down, and who gave that to you?
So it goes back to my dad gave me this piece of advice. He said, a fool and their money are easily parted. And it goes back to the education piece. If you're going to get into this world or whatever world it might be in entrepreneurial, but starting a business and being your own boss, be educated about the business that you're in. If you're going to take on investors' capital, understand that you need to be that key person of influence. Goes back again to being that knowledgeable base and sharing the knowledge first and foremost, but be knowledgeable about what you're doing with that business, that money, whatever it might be. So again, a fool and their money can be easily parted. It's a best
really good quote.
Really good quote.
How do you like to give back? What are you doing to give back to I guess to everybody?
Probably not enough as I should be doing. I'm really, obviously there's a podcast which is free, and that's a little bit of giving back, giving the education piece out. I would like to do more, particularly with cancer research. Two immediate members of my family have passed away in the last 20 years. So I've experienced the harshness of it. So with our investments that we're buying now, we're looking to get into essentially like the Starlight Foundation, which is, but it's Starlight for adults. So, Make-A-Wish Foundation, not Starlight Foundation, Make-A-Wish Foundation, but it's for adults. So we're looking to try and support local charities in Texas in the markets that we're in. But I want to be a little bit more active and also grow the education piece as well. So it's a handful of things, but I should always be doing more, right? You always, when you get asked that question, you do a self-reflection. I could be doing a little bit more.
You could always be doing more, but I think with your podcast and with just giving back the information to people, that's enough, right?
Hopefully
people that are listening to this podcast now learn something, hopefully, that they didn't know, that hopefully influence their life. And so that's a massive way to give back. And I appreciate you sharing that.
My pleasure.
How can we reach you? How can the listeners reach you?
Best way to reach me is head over to reedgoossens.com. That's ReedGoossens. Hit me up there. You can I live in Los Angeles. If you're ever in Los Angeles, you want to grab a beer, you want to go for lunch, I'm always willing to meet up. So, and you can head over to, you can also check out my podcast, Investing in the US, an Aussie's Guide to US Real Estate. And I just had Scott on my show, so you'll be able to go back and forth.
That's funny. I was just in LA yesterday.
Oh, yeah?
I was.
Oh.
So
you should definitely. Yeah, exactly.
Well, hey man, I really appreciate you sharing kind of your journey, coming from Australia all the way here, going from a triplex to now multi-million dollars, over 40 million in assets under management for you, over 100 million in transactions you've been part of. There's so many key things about what you've gone through that people can learn from, and so I really appreciate you sharing that. Kind of what your why is, why you're here, why you're doing what you're doing, so that you can spend more time with your family, control your time. I'm happy to hear that. And just ultimately, I appreciate you being here.
Thanks, man. And I mean, I'm really proud to be on the show and be asked to come on the show. You've done an awesome job with it and keep up the great work.
Hey, I appreciate that. We'll talk to you real soon.
See you, mate.